Hi everyone, my name is Lucy Massesso and I chose to do my evaluation on the Marlinton Community Garden. So the why in Marlinton, West Virginia um, is pretty easy to address. Marlinton's located in what's designated as a USDA food desert, meaning that their grocery stores are not easily accessible to a lot of the residents that live there. And sometimes even when they do have a grocery store close to their home, when they get to the store, a lot of the shelves are bare. Marlinton's known for being the last stop on the truck. So when our grocery stores placed their orders, especially during COVID, by the time the truck made it to the store, they didn't have all of the things that they had anticipated stocking that week. So food accessibility and food security are really hot topics in this area. And who was involved? We talked about the partnering organizations, but we didn't really talk about who the stakeholders were. Because as much as there are stakeholders located within those organizations, the real people who were involved were the gardeners and a lot of children who came to the garden to learn. So we had community business partners that supported financially parts of the garden, but also just neighboring businesses who were invested because they wanted to make sure that it was a nice space beside of their store, or maybe something that was going to bring more people to their stores. We also had all of our local politicians, our town council, our Marlinton Listens hubcap group. So there were a lot of stakeholders involved in this project. We didn't target a population as far as the growers went, which I think is an important piece of this puzzle, because the target population was the community of Marlinton. And the hope was that the gardeners will be a diverse group of people so that they could really learn from each other and build some new relationships and a sense of community. So the few basic elements of the program is that we constructed a community garden. The garden was divided into 8 plots originally, hoping that we would receive 8 gardeners. We had over 8 people interested in gardening, so we cut those plots down even smaller to have 10 of them. And the gardeners sign up. They come to 4 educational lessons is required to be part of the garden. They receive the password to the garden gate. Their plots are tilled for them. All of the plants and seeds, water, Fertilizer and any pesticides that are needed are also provided as part of this. And the only requirement that we have of the gardeners is that they measure how many hours they spend in the garden, how many people they take with them there, and how much food is produced, and we measure that in pounds. So previously, the Linwood Alive garden, which you can see there in that slide, Linwood Alive, as part of Grow Appalachia, really focused on that numerical data. And so when I was looking for something to evaluate for this class, it became pretty apparent that the qualitative side of this wasn't being measured. The community perception of the garden wasn't taken into account. Also, how that made the gardeners feel to participate in something. Did they build a new relationship? Did they feel safe in the garden? Did they feel safer now that there was a garden there instead of the previous, abandoned lot that had a burned down house? So our previous data that we did have to establish some of those baselines, we did have a farmer's market that was occurring, and we knew how many vendors were there. And we also knew how many pounds of food were being grown through the Grow Appalachia surveys. The focus group was a lot of fun for this one. The focus group will take place in the garden, and it's more of like an open house kind of a day to invite people who do have an interest, especially if they were a donor or our town council or our mayor, to come down and explore the garden and get to know the people who are gardening there, all while participating in some of the questions that we wanted to answer throughout this process. The survey was supposed to address several questions. We wanted to know if it was addressing the community identified needs from the comprehensive plan. We wanted to know if the garden was providing a gathering space to bring the communities together and if it was fostering relationships. We hope to find out if rehabilitating the vacant lot into a garden was perceived as a town asset. We wanted to measure if there was increased knowledge of the gardeners using gardening best practices. We wanted to know if there was a decrease in food insecurity for families. We wanted to know if there was an increase in fresh food consumption in families, and if there was an increase in number of vendors for the farmers market, and if that created economic opportunities for families. When I developed the survey, initially I thought about using an electronic survey because that seems to be the norm these days, but another specific characteristic of this region is that we're located within the National Radio Dead Zone. So not only do we not have cell phone service or Wi-Fi in many areas, but also a lot of our community, they don't have access to these devices. So the survey was going to be both delivered electronically and in paper format. Also in paper format, you can catch the gardeners in the gardens. So at the conclusion of all of the survey, I did actually have an opportunity to share it with some of the gardeners. And there was a little bit of response, which I was excited about and I wanted to share. So in the findings, most of the gardeners that I spoke with said that the Marlinton Garden is a safe space where they can gather and garden and socialize. According to the survey, participation in the Marlinton Community Garden contributed to new and stronger relationships with members of their community. There was a perceived increased knowledge in gardening best practices. And the Marlinton Community Garden contributed over 1,000 pounds of fresh vegetables to the gardeners and shoppers at the Marlinton Farmers Market, reducing food insecurity for those who grow and purchase the food. All the gardeners in the Marlinton Community Garden reported that they ate more fresh foods due to participation in the garden. And there was an increased number of vendors at the Marlinton Farmers Market. So all of those were good findings. We did learn two other things that I put into the recommendations piece, is that communication has really kind of failed. There are a lot of people who don't know about the garden or want more information about it. And the other recommendation was that we need to expand because the garden, no pun intended, is growing. So those are my two recommendations from that. Finally, my question about research versus evaluation, I thought was an interesting piece of this class, because I think I've used the terms interchangeably in the past. So it's good to have those things defined, and that research is a deliberate attempt to collect data in a controlled situation. And so when I think about all of the variables that were in this survey and this evaluation of the Marlinton Garden, it definitely is evaluation and not research. So research leads to the development of knowledge and uses a scientific method to try to explain and predict phenomena by controlling variables, where evaluation is likely using correlational data and helps us understand processes and programs. And then finally with data, is that I always heard that quantitative data was numbers and qualitative data is how you feel. And I think that's kind of the short and sweet of it, but a little more formal is that it's structured hard data with numbers and calibrated measurements versus verbal descriptions, observations, and note-taking, which are much more relevant in my line of work. And 3 things I learned, I'm going to cheat and give you 4. When to use qualitative versus quantitative methods, the importance of the role that the audience for who the report is for plays in the development and execution of the evaluation. That's something I didn't really think about before this course, but that you definitely want to evaluate for whom it's going to be presented to, and that's something I'll carry with me. 3rd is how to conduct a focus group. I enjoyed thinking through that activity, and I think it's something that I could use in my community. And the 4th one that I learned is how to record myself while doing a PowerPoint. So I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Thank you very much.